Hello and welcome. My name is Asaf, and I'm here with Mr. Pete Lockett, a multi-percussionist, composer, arranger. And Pete, you've done so many things and played so many different styles of music. I don't know even where to begin my question. Maybe the best thing would be to take it over to you. And could you tell our audience where you started, how you started playing, and what did you start playing? Did you start playing drums? Or I know that you play tabla and loads of other things. How did it all start for you?
Well, it was lucky really because I mean I didn't start until very late, so I was like 19 when I started drumming. Just walked past a drum shop in Portsmouth where I came from, and saw an advert in the window for drum lessons and went in. And like a couple of weeks later, I was in a punk band, and then like a year later, I moved to London. It was the first thing that really kind of resounded with me in terms of like a really deep connection inside. And then the whole grind of trying to get stuff happening in London. I'm sure it was the same when you first came to London, and it's a real struggle to get things happening. And then it was all going on okay. I was starting to get some gigs and things were starting to happen. And then the Indian thing came along again quite by chance. There was a free concert in Alexander Park, Alexander Palace.
Oh yeah,
There was a big festival in Alexander Park, Festival of India in
North London. Yes, yeah.
yeah, in the late 80s. An amazing festival. But my friend lived right next door to there, and we'd gone a couple of times, and we'd seen just the stalls and the temples and everything, and thought it was amazing. But then one night we're sitting in his house, and this music came through the window, and we were like, well, it was like music from Mars. We were like, wow, what's that? So we were like the Bisto kids. We were off into the park following the sounds of the music. And I mean, it was amazing, really, because it was a free concert. It was the late great Ali Akbar Khan, the Sarod master, and the amazing percussion legend Zakir Hussain. So it was like, for me, it completely blew my mind. And I was like, wow, when you see that for the first time, you've never heard it before. It's like just completely and utterly mind blowing. And so I made a mental note of it, but I was at that point, I was quite, on the rails of being a drum set player, and that was what I was going to do. But anyway, a couple of weeks later, I lived in Tottenham in North London. A newspaper fell through the front door, free newspaper, and it had fallen open, and there was an advert there for tabla lessons. So I thought that's a calling, so that's how I got into it. It's completely accidental, all of it. It's a great big rhythmic accident.
Incredible. Wow. That's amazing. So how did you get into tabla? And you started to take lessons?
Yeah, I started to take lessons. I mean, tabla lessons are funny because the first one you go to, you've got maybe 40 people, and they're all like, yeah, I am learning tabla. The second week it's at least half. The third week it's half again. So it ended up after about a month, actually. It wasn't very long. There was just me and this one other guy. Wow. And I was, although I didn't have any tablas, I'd made some tablas out of some drum pads and some cork for the gab, for the black spot. And so I was practicing, and then the Yusuf Ali Khan was my teacher, nephew of Ali Akbar Khan, quite bizarrely.
Wow.
He said, look, just come to my house. I'll teach you for nothing. It's just going to be, you're sitting waiting for this guy to, get example 4 down,
Yeah, but
respectfully, he was trying his best,
But he probably saw that you are really into it, and he was thankful for that, yeah?
Well, one of the things is actually that it's so, like, everything is so different. You go and like the way you strike the drum, the fact that there's the drums with the black spots and the different tonal areas to hit, and the hand movements, and the fact that for most part only one hand plays one drum, and then the musical system and the rhythmic system and the people and the food and the culture, and like everything is like completely amazing, and you're completely enchanted by it. Bearing in mind, before that I knew absolutely nothing about it whatsoever, Indian culture or Indian music or anything really.
Interesting, yeah. So So it was a whole different experience, rhythmically as well as culturally, basically.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing about learning like that is that when you go into a completely different culture, like if you go to, I don't know, say you go to a music school, like Western music school, um, you know all of the formalities of your culture. So if someone's being sarcastic or someone's putting you down or you notice it immediately. Whereas when you go into another culture, you've almost got like a 5 or 6 year breathing space where people can say what they like. They can be as dismissive about you sarcastically as you like, and you don't know it. And that's a real advantage, actually.
Yeah, it's incredible. Wow, yeah. I know that firsthand also from myself. But obviously, later on, I understand that you actually went to India. Have you studied there as well, or did you
Well,
go?
no, I didn't. All my studying was in London. First of all, North Indian with Yusuf Ali Khan, and then I studied South Indian with Karakudi Krishnamurti, the great Mridangam master. So actually, the first time I went to India was to tour. I did a British Council tour, and it was with Selva Ganesh. I took Simon Limbrick, who's a classical percussionist, Nana Sibo, who's a great Ghanaian percussionist. We took a sound engineer, and we toured. It was with Selva, a band called Marigia, a band from Delhi, and that was my first proper introduction, amazing introduction to India, actually, because you're touring the country, spending time with the great classical artist great Viku Vinayakam played with us in Chennai. Obviously, he's obviously Selva's father. So it was just like one of those experiences that is like, wow.
And I understand that from that point and on, you've been more exposed to the South Indian system, which is really, really very different than the North Indian. And I think a lot of people are not really appreciating that difference. They think, okay, Indian
Yeah,
music is Indian music, but
yeah,
this is a really interesting question that I like to ask many different people from different sides of the coin, and I
yeah,
always get a little bit of a different answer. But I'll ask you the same question:
yeah.
How do you see the difference between the South Indian rhythm, or the South Indian Carnatic and rhythm, and the North Indian Hindustani music and rhythm? How do you see
Well,
that difference?
Well, I think I always say in kind of educational settings, I always say it's a little bit like the difference between rock and jazz. The more you know about rock or the more you know about jazz, the more you can see the nuances of the difference in all of the rhythmic structures, the musical structures, and the whole thing. And in a way, if we analyze the structure of the music and then analyze the structure of the rhythm, it's more of a window into the differences that are there rhythmically. So if we look at the main kind of modus operandi of North Indian classical Hindustani music, then you've got long performances of a raga, which will go through alap, jor, jala, and then the gat when the tabla player comes in.
Yes.
So you've got this long kind of exploration of the raga, and for most part the tal. Whereas in South India, the actual musical form is. This is a really simple way to say it, but it's a way that I find that people understand. The form, in a way, is more song-based. So it's more shorter pieces of music that have a beginning, arrangements, and an end, excluding the longer pieces, such as Ram Tanam, Pallavi, and of course the Tani Avatram.
Yes, the
So
percussion
if we
solo.
then exactly, yeah. So if we then take that idea and then we look at rhythmically of how the systems work, what we get. So if we go back to the Hindustani thing of the long, exploration of the raga, in North India you get long explorations of rhythmic themes. So there's a lot of theme and variation compositions, which you don't. Some of the modern Mridangam players are doing theme and variation, but largely there's no theme and variation compositions, such as, for example, Kaida or Laghi. Relas, of course, are also theme and variation, although there's normally a lot less variations. So you have this idea of theme and variation compositions, where a theme, so you have a theme, So, for example, da gena dati da 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 dati da gena dati da gena daga tuna gena da gena dati da da dati da dati da gena dati da gena daga dina gena da. So you have something like this, and then all the variations can only contain that core material. Okay, so everything has to be done. There are some exceptions. So when you get to the end, different syllables and different things can sometimes be integrated into the mix. And so they'll have these long periods where they're developing a theme, and then they'll resolve it with a, normally with a long chakradar, with a T-high of T-highs, or a big conclusion. Then they go back to the time cycle. Then they might play another kaida, then back to the time cycle. Then they might move on to some fixed compositions, some short. That's the area that's closest to the South Indian, because you get these short fixed compositions, almost like little poems. No, not the Korepu. The fixed compositions are similar to corvoys in a way.
Carvers, yeah, okay.
Like this type of thing, which in a way is kind of similar to some corvoy structures.
Yes.
So then they would have this. Then they would go on to the rella, the rolling, this rolling thing, and then a big conclusion. Whereas in South India, the system is altogether, completely different. And if you then correlate that with the idea of the song form, then you kind of can see how they've come up with it. So in South India, you kind of get a theme introduced into the time flow, which. So different, different identities of the theme is introduced, and then they'll reduce that in length. The koropo, as you say, it'll be introduced more frequently, basically, into the basic time flow, and then they'll take a concluding corvoy, to finish it up, which would come in two halves. The first half based on the theme that they've introduced into the time flow, and the second half, different reductions of tati genatom syllables. So that's and so then they'll move through that, and then of course when there's more than one player, they'll go to the koroipu section, which will be it's kind of like a question and answer, but it's slightly different in that each tal has its own kind of koroipu. So for example, if you're in 8, then you'd play groups of 7. So first of all, you play groups of 7 from beat 3, and then you'd play half the number of groups of 7 from beat 2, and then from the end of 1, and then that goes backwards and forwards between the performers in a question and answer thing. Then there'll be the equivalent to the rella in North Indian, and then they'll have the mora and corvoy to finish. Now traditionally, those two. Not always, you don't hear it that often. Normally you'll hear this one, and then reduced and all that. But there are lots of different corvoy moras that can be played, and quite often that will come with a matching corvoy at the end. So you'd have the two together, and then you'd have a couple of bars of time and a little arudi or tiha or something to wind it up. So that I think I don't know whether that does explain some of the differences between them, but I think if to zoom out and look at a very simple overview, I would say we look at the music and see that one's more long extemporization and the other one is effectively more song based.
Yeah. And tell me how, of course, you've been introduced to South Indian rhythm later on. How did that affect whatever you're doing within, of course, the North Indian stuff that you were doing? But also, aside of that, I'm sure you've been doing a lot of other things, like playing virtually probably any other styles of music that exists on this little stone. So how did Konnakol affect what you're doing? Did you feel anything that happened after you've enriched your rhythmical life with Konnakol?
Well, Konnakol actually was in many ways was a byproduct for me of not demeaning it, but it was a byproduct of studying Tabla and then studying South Indian Mridangam. And Natwangam, which is, the bells and the vocal percussion you get with Bharatanatyam dance. When I first started on the tabla, what I found was that, my teacher would teach me the compositions and obviously the syllables. That's how you learn it. So I'd learned the recitation and the actual physical side of it. But what I found was that I could play much better physically if I could speak it. And so for compositions that I could speak, I could play them. And so what it meant was that even in the beginning with the tabla, even gegetete, 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 even the basics, I would recite and practice a lot. First of all, that's like a massive aid to memory and an aid to kind of get everything down. But what it did was it developed my pronunciation of the syllables, particularly when you get fast strings of syllables. And so that was the one thing about Konnakol that was very useful in the beginning. In the very beginning, it aided my ability to play the intention of the syllables, as in the tabla or the Mridangam or whatever it was. But as time went on, I started to learn different instruments and different Middle Eastern and different stuff. And then what I would then seek to do, it was backwards engineer it. So rather than the syllables, being the predecessor to the physicality, it was kind of like the other way around. I'd work out, I had the syllables, then I work out how that was going to be orchestrated on a certain drum. And for me, that was the biggest challenge, because it's really, really hard to get a system that is not absolute, because neither of the North or the South Indian systems are absolute in their syllables. And this is one of the reasons that I say when people learn Konnakol, I always say to them that it's very advantageous to learn one of the drums to whatever level, whether it's to a performance level or not. But the reason is that you kind of understand all of the where all those syllables flow in the stream of time. So, for example, on the Mridangam, you kind of phrases like that. The tango is the Ada Japu stroke, and you know where the bass strokes come and where the emphasis on the treble strokes are. So that really aids interpretation and orchestration on other drums. But one of the other things that's really important, and this doesn't come across to people learning Konnakol, and that is that the ambiguity of the syllables. So, I mean, even on tabla, you can have the sound on the rim, and sometimes it can be na, and sometimes it can be ta. Din can be the full open hand, the full hand, or the first finger on the inner ring. So there's that. And then in terms of using syllables that come from the Mridangam on other percussion, such as Gatam and Kanjira, of course, there aren't all those strokes available. And so people are using sets of syllables and then interpreting them in the same way that I did applying it to frame drum or applying it to other stuff. The point of saying that was that it's good to keep an open mind in terms of how things are orchestrated. And it's not always going to be na is always going to be a high pitched stroke and stuff like that. So not an absolute system. The best way to describe it, the ambiguity, is that it's, if you take the word through without a context, it would be impossible for either of us to know what it means. It would be a meaningless utterance. So without the context of through the ball or through the window, the word actually is meaningless, effectively, apart from a sound that you can hear, and that's the same with the syllables and where they fit into the actual system as well, because there's a huge amount of ambiguity, more so in the South. Even Mridangam players will play, for example, some will play right 3-1-3-1 on the high pitch side, and then left right bass with the left. And other players would do it as more as a right left, right left. And so the actual even becomes ambiguous in the way that it's played on the drums as well.
That's really interesting, and reading your book about translating the language of tabla, balls, and Konnakol to the drums. Now I understand where it's all coming from. It's that how you said, keep an open mind and see how you can realize those syllables and translate it to almost anything you want,
Yeah,
as long as you understand the rhythms. And I think the most important is internalize the phrases and the rhythms and the way they're laid out on the bar line.
yeah.
And then you can basically, with a little bit of being thoughtful about it, you can translate them to the kid. Tell us a little bit about your book, or rather two books about translating those syllables to the drum kit.
Yeah, the first one was Indian Rhythms for the Drumset, which was out on Hudson Music a few years ago. Actually, it kind of came about through my workshops and education. Really, I started to piece together ideas to introduce some of the Indian rhythmic structures in a practical, kind of hands-on way that drum set players could take it away and or percussionists, anyone really, to be honest, composers or anyone, take it away and have an oversight of the building blocks. Because for me, one of the things that I come across a lot, and it's an obstacle for a lot of people, is that people are terrified of Indian music and Indian rhythm. It is massively complex. They see that it's massively complex and think, I'm never going to learn all that. So, it's easier to not start.
It's the speed as well, isn't it?
And the speed as well. And like everything, it's super virtuosic. But when you go to the country and you see, I was fortunate enough to play in the memorial concert for the late great Alla Raka, Zaki's father, a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and mind-blowing experience. That went on from like 5:30 in the morning until midnight. I was involved in the evening section, but I was there for the whole day, and it's amazing because you'll get kids go on stage that are 5 and 6 and play blistering stuff in 15 or 19 or something, and it's the level is so high. And I think in some ways in the West we've kind of got used to perceiving that level as only being like the top performers, the Dave Weckels and the people at the top of the game. In India, actually, that level is a lot further down the pecking order. So there's a lot of like utterly mind-blowing, mid-range, even low level play. Even the Postman's, got some stuff down. It's literally amazing. There's so many fantastic players, and certainly teaches you to be humble with the whole thing, which is always a healthy thing to have.
Coming from, I grew up in Israel, and coming from a Middle Eastern place, sometimes you'd go to a shop and you'll hear the grocer, the guy who sells vegetables, singing in quarter tones, like so accurately and stuff. And he's just singing to himself. No,
exactly.
He's not intending to he just heard Kaltum all his life, and he can do all those makamat, all these scales and stuff easy. I guess it's the thing is these people, I think in this culture there is a point of starting very young, and music is such an integral part of the culture. So whole families are singing and dancing and watching music, and I think we miss a little bit of that in the West. And I think in a sense, when you start so young, I think things can get easier for you. If you want to develop it further, of course, not necessarily, but if you wanted to be a Mridangam player and you started at 2 when your hands couldn't reach either side, just one side at a time, then I
think it's a sliding scale in a way, because there's two things here. The first one, like on that point, is I kind of see it as a sliding scale in many ways. Is that you'll get someone, whether it's politically correct or not, I think there are different levels of inner talent or inner calling for certain things. Some people are, you look at Zakir Hussain or the late great Harry Shankar, the amazing Kanjira player, and they're not of this world. It's like just a completely amazing, virtuosity and musicianship combined with it. That's the essence, actually, not just pure technical ability. So I think there's a sliding scale of learning young versus natural ability, and those two things can be moved around to create different outcomes. And the other thing, going back to what you were saying about the culture, and I really learned a lot from I had a trip out to amazing project. In fact, your friend Tim Garland was involved in that when we played in London in the project. I was out in Rajasthan with the promoter took us out into the desert, and we had a couple of days in all these little villages, and each village would put on a performance under the banyan tree, or the villages with no running water, just literally in the middle of the desert, and then I kind of got to put together like 25, 30 musicians. Then we rehearsed for a week, a couple of months later, and then we toured India, and we did the festival hall in London and a few different QEH in London and a few different things. That's where Tim was involved. But what amazed me about that trip was to see how much music was just part of their everyday life. Because when you go into a classical music, North Indian or South Indian or Western or whatever, you're kind of seeing trained people playing music. But when you go back into that village setting, you see actually music, you see it almost this a priori sort of state, at the root of it. Music is just part of their community, and from their community you get culture. Without community you can't really get culture. So we're kind of in the position now where we don't really have community so much that I can see in the West. I'm not saying one of them is better than the other one. They're both entirely different, But what we have with art and music is we have commodity and fashion, something you can succeed at or be famous at or look impressive at, or to try not to feel inadequate by playing fast or something, So we kind of, in a sense, we've kind of lost a little bit of the heart of it, and obviously not saying every performer, but the actual existential scenario that we find ourselves in making music, on a stage with a barrier between us and the audience, albeit an invisible existential barrier.
Yeah, that is really, really interesting. I wanted to see, since a lot of my viewers are interested in Konnakol and interested in developing their rhythm, if you could show us one of your favorite rhythmic exercise that involves some of those rhythmic cycles, whether it's Tabla balls or Mridangam Konnakkol.
Yeah, well, one of the things that is, I think, is always interesting and useful is to take compositions up through the different time levels. Even with takadimi, 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 taking any kind of simple phrase through single, 1.5 times and double speed.
Basically, we like to call this in the West metric modulation.
Metric
right?
modulation.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
A lot of the exercises in Konnakol, not necessarily compositions, but a lot of the exercises, the rhythmic exercises, work in that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is, I just got was just on the last clinic before lockdown was in Malta, and there was a guy there who's been learning Konnakol, and he was in India and he had some lessons, and then I was teaching him some stuff. He's actually a great drum set player, and he's one of those people who just gets stuff instantly. Show him something and he's nailed it, and he's got questions that half the time don't know the answers to. Anyway, he's great because one of the things that I'm explaining to him is the idea of context, and like when I learnt South Indian drumming, I kind of learnt it blind in a way for probably the first 2.5 years to 3 years, in that I was learning all of these things, and I didn't know what they were. I didn't know what application they had. I didn't know where they fitted into the overall scheme of things. Only when it came to doing my first, I did. It's called the Arangetram. It's like almost like the the first professional concert under the tutelage of your teacher. All the musicians came from India, and it was a brilliant, amazing event actually. But only when we started to put that performance together did I really understand where all the elements fit. And one of the things that I see with some people that have learned Konnakol is that they've kind of gone to someone and they've learned some Konnakol, they've learned this or they've learned that, and they have like all of these exercises, but they don't necessarily know how they would fit together, and what the different phraseology is, and how it all makes sense. And what like, with Benji, what I'm explaining most is that he'll learn something from me or from his teacher in India, and then he'll hear something similar, but then he won't understand how it works by listening to it. So with that explanation, it's like, oh, I see, that's what's happened to it. That's where it's, And so I think that's an important thing, is to get the context to try as much as possible when learning Konnakol, is to try and understand the context in which it's used. Because sometimes you'll hear stuff being recited, or you'll hear people, I don't know, putting stuff on social media or different things, and you'll hear, like, it's almost like you're hearing little snapshot of something. Whereas, it's very useful. Having said that, the flip side of that coin is that, of course, all of those, modulation exercises and mathematical equations and, reduction and expansion and all of the things that you find in South Indian rhythm, for example, are eminently useful to apply to drum set or to whatever, really.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's just, again, as you said before, it's just a question of how you can imagine and make that mental vision in your mind of how it can sound on your instrument, and then just translate it once you've internalized all those complex and fascinating rhythms, really.
Yeah.
Pete, this has been really, really a great interview. Thank you so much for all this really a lot of inside information. I mean, it's for me, it's great. This interview was great. Because you have such a broad knowledge of Indian rhythms, both south and north, and not so many people have that knowledge in their pocket. So thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it.
Well, pleasure, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, maybe we can just end with you just letting our viewers know what your whereabouts now, where you are, what's your next or recent project.
After Armageddon.
It's a dangerous question. I didn't know how to kind of. But anyway, it's just tell us what you have on your plate at the moment. You're doing. I'm sure, like most of us, you're doing a lot of online work. But I know that you've got a new album, a new recording you're working on. And some other things. So, please feel free to share. And also, you have your books in Hudson publication, and I'm sure that people can contact you for lessons if they wanted to as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to do Skype, some more Skype lessons and stuff like that. So people just can get me through the website or whatever. I'm easy to get hold of. And I've got a new project with Peter John Vitesse, who's a great keyboard player. We're kind of putting a lot of time and effort into that. Just finished mixing that, so that's all positive. We've got writing some new books again for Hudson. I'm going to start working on, because I was it's great I was really happy to see that you got your Konnakol channel up. I think that's really, really brilliant. And I think I'm gonna put something up. I was wondering what to give back, because some people are, trying to have free Instagram workshops and stuff like that. But I want to put, like your channel, I want to put something permanent up there. So I'm not sure how I'm gonna do it yet, but
I know that you've already got like an online course or something like that that has to do with Konnakol.
yeah, that's through online lessons, which is a German thing.
Right.
But I'm going to put some time. I'll probably have a Patreon channel or something like that.
Yeah.
And what I want it to be is, kind of like informal, just like each day I'll do a particular composition or analyze how a composition works. Sometimes it's hard to hear. One of the compositions that Benji had sent me through and said, I don't know what's happening here. Analyze this for me, and it was a really interesting reduction. And you hear these reductions anyway, but this was an interesting one in the sense that it was the Tati Ginatom reduction was, first of all, 3-3-3-3-3, then 3-3-3-3-2, 3-3-3-2-2, 3-3-2-2-2-2. Then 2-2-2-2.
That sounds a little bit like Manjunath BC.
Similar stuff, yeah.
Similar stuff,
and then it went down even further with the ones and the two.
Okay.
So a very so then it 2-2-2-2-2, then 2-2-2-2-1, 2-2-2-1-1, 2-2-1-1-1, 2-1-1-1,
yeah, and
then 1-1-1-1-1. So it's a pretty cool. But when you hear it, blasting past. And then, of course, each time they play it, and this is one of the things of the more detailed players that you get in Southend. Each time they play something, they'll play it different. So although he played that composition, each of the 3 times he reversed it in a completely different way.
Yeah. Variations,
yeah. Yeah. So it's hard to. But yeah, I'll have a Patreon channel or something like that. And but I've had my free website for years. PeteLockett.com is just for lessons. It's just loads of free lessons. That's 20 years old now. That, and that's separate from my actual website, which is .info.
Fantastic. That's great. And to whoever is listening to this, I'd really recommend checking out the website and the lessons, the free stuff, and the books, of course, on Hudson Publications. And please contact Pete for lessons and any information that you need. Pete, thank you so much again. It's been a real pleasure for me, and I hope that we've met it's incredible, and we haven't really met each other yet.
Unbelievable.
In person.
We'll rectify that once we're out of the cage.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Pete, thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks, man.